Thank you for joining ProTech training today for this DevOps webinar. Few housekeeping tips before I pass over control to Nasser. Everyone is on mute today, but I do have the questions open for anyone who has any questions. We're going to answer them about halfway through the presentation, and then we will answer the rest at the end. So you can go ahead and pop those questions in. I also have the chat room open if you wanted to chat amongst the audience. We're going to run a few polls throughout the presentation just to check in with everyone and see how DevOps is going in your organization or how you are doing training and certifications in your companies. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass over the presentation to Nasser. Give me 1 second.
All right. Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate this. Just a little bit about myself so that you are comfortable, that you're in good hands. My name is Nasser Al-Batal. I have been in the IT industry for about 28 plus years in different facets of the industry. Mainly my activities are in consulting, coaching, and training for a different set of best practices, including, of course, DevOps, Agile, Scrum, TOGAF, ITIL, and a number of additional ones along the way. Consulting with government, with enterprises, and many different verticals within the industry, and I've been doing this globally for quite a number of years. Quickly, just to introduce at a high level what we call the body of knowledge associated with DevOps. And there is a big difference between what DevOps looks like versus other best practices like ITIL or TOGAF or COBIT and so on. DevOps has been growing organically in the industry, and there is no specific life cycle per se associated with it or with its certification or its publications. So what you see a number of many different books issued by many different people in the industry talking about different aspects of DevOps. But the two main publications that are considered kind of the Bible for DevOps is, one of them is the Phoenix Project, and the other one is DevOps Handout. Those are the two main publications that are used by many different examination institutes to actually guide the students in the DevOps world. Of course, plus whatever the vendor is providing in terms of material to you so that you can prepare for examination. So you will see, as an example, in DevOps, there is DevOps Foundation, which is the building block, for everything else above that. But then there is no kind of progression per se in terms of the other, let me call it for now, middle layer, or in other words, practitioner certifications. You will see vertical certifications, but they're not really kind of end-to-end life cycle approach. This may change in the future, but this is the way it is today. So you see, as an example, there is continuous delivery, there is continuous testing, there is desktop testing engineer, and so on. So there are more kind of vertical subject matters within the overall aspect of DevOps, but still to be discovered how they're going to tie them all, in terms of a life cycle approach to get you, as an example, to DevOps Master or DevOps Expert per se. So these publications, something to keep in mind: DevOps Handout and the Phoenix Project. Before you figure out, as a matter of fact, whether it's DevOps or anything else that you are introducing to your organization, you really need to figure out why you're doing this. What's the purpose behind it for your organization? What is your value proposition, differentiating factors, and how you're going to go about all of this, and what you're going to use in terms of products and services to achieve that why. So you need to do all of this to say is that you need to really do some homework before jumping the gun and say, yeah, I'm going to need DevOps, or I'm going to need a tool for DevOps, or are going to need ITIL, or whatever else that you are going to need. So critical is to figure out the why for your organization. Any best practice, any topic, any body of knowledge that gets introduced to the industry, it gets introduced because there is some sort of benefits behind it. And the ones that are really associated with DevOps is the ability to increase performance, right? To increase the number of releases, the frequency of releases, the size of releases, which will enable you to capture market share sooner than later, which will enable you to be productive more today than before, which also is going to enable you financially, because now the customer is seeing the results and your cost model may change accordingly to capture that. Also, it's not going to cost you as much because you're not having as many outages, right? So your total cost of ownership is considerably decreasing, which will increase your profitability. One of the major challenges that you will see with DevOps is basically, on one hand, the business speed or the business need for change versus the stability of your IT environment and operational area. The business, as you all know, more and more is becoming quick in making decisions, quick to act and react. They need to basically answer to customer. So innovation speed is required. I don't really have time for outages and for loss of time and effort. So it's everything's quick, versus the IT side of things, which says, wait a minute, I need to make sure that I have the proper control. I have to control change. I have to deal with incidents and problems. I have to, manage certain contracts and certain agreements. So it's almost that there is, to a certain extent, there is now a conflict between the two perspectives of the business versus IT. So DevOps need to reduce and or eliminate this challenge by bridging the gap between the different functional groups. So we need to go faster without the risk or with minimal risk. We need to make sure that whatever investment there is on the table is actually invested in the right place for the right reasons. And we want to stay as much as possible away from the silo or the vertical mindset. So DevOps is going to help in all of that. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So as you can see, the business is leading the race. And historically speaking, development and operation were always lagging behind, and in some time considerably lagging behind. And this is why organization turns around and end up outsourcing a lot of their function, whether it's information technology or information management or both. So what DevOps is trying to achieve here is trying to minimize the gap as much as possible between the business and these functional groups, the development groups and the operations groups. So you're there to enable and to support the business. You're not there to lag behind, because then the business is not going to benefit from your existence. So this is why you need to change the way you do IT in general. And we're going to see a couple of hints along the way about that. Another challenge that you need to overcome is increase the agility within your organization. And DevOps is going to help with that. Again, we're breaking down silos, we're improving constraints or reducing constraints. We are using Agile, as a matter of fact, and Agile principles on both sides, development side and operation side. I'm sure you have heard this probably a million times. Everybody wants Agile, even though Agile may not be applicable to every organization. But nevertheless, there is the spirit of agility that it's based on the Agile approach that you can still use to enable your business. And to a certain extent, you ought to do this in this body of knowledge. There's a great deal of need to cross-pollination between roles and responsibilities and knowledge and experiences. So have some of your operation people sit development exercises and vice versa. So now both teams feel the pain of the other, and both teams start to get acquainted and they start to understand the challenge that the other is going through. Don't just come in and throw the code over the wall and say, you know, thank you very much, it's all yours now. And I have no idea what this is supposed to be, right? So this is also going to facilitate and is going to enable, at the end of the day, your ability to deliver and to deploy faster with much lesser errors and much lesser outages, all right? So with that, what we're doing, we're extending the agile mindset to not just software development, but also to operation mindset. So when we're talking about DevOps, DevOps is a mix of culture supported by technology, automation, and best practices. So DevOps is not an application alone. It's not, in other words, IT or a process or an agreement. Or DevOps is a collection of many, different elements, but mainly it's actually how we're gonna transform our behavior to work properly together, to bridge the gap and to break down the barriers, right? Remove these walls between development and operation. So even though we're talking about development and operation, and this is what DevOps stands for, still this goes way beyond that on both ends, from the architecture consideration all the way to continuous improvement, all right? So as you are improving the ability to deliver and to produce quicker and faster, you're also enabling or increasing the business capability to deliver ongoing value and business outcome. So we talk about what DevOps is not. Here you go, self-explanatory. Really, it's not just about the culture. It's not just about the tool. It's not a cookie cutter. Very, very important when we're talking, automation. A lot of organizations, and actually this is applicable whether it's DevOps or something else. A lot of organizations, they say, well, I implemented X being some sort of a best practice. So how did you implement it? Well, I bought the tool. I bought Jenkins, or I bought Puppet, or I bought ServiceNow, or I bought Tivoli, or whatever. But this is not implementing the best practice. This is just implementing a tool. This is getting good at using the tool. The question becomes, did you define and design, as an example, your body of knowledge architecture and how this is going to affect your business, and whether the tool is going to force your business processes to follow it, or is it going to dictate its own? And we can go on and on about that discussion. So basically what I'm trying to say, it's not just about implementing a tool. DevOps will enable you smaller, more frequent releases, lesser risk, lesser cost. We talked about the culture and the collaboration. This is key. Without it, there is no DevOps. When we're talking about automation, you need to set the stage, and we're going to see this a little bit later. We call it the cadence, or in plain English, your heart rhythm. So you need to set the stage about the speed that you're using throughout your value stream. And if we're not familiar with the term value stream is a different, let's call them for now, different steps supported by different business capabilities that will achieve a business value or a business outcome. So you can establish a value stream for a baker. So a part of that value stream is getting the wheat. Another part is having the oven. Another part is doing or mixing the dough, and so on and so forth. So there is a value stream that you're going to follow beginning to end in order to get the bread made and to be able to sell it. So you want to minimize what we call technical debt as much as possible. And technical debt here is when you have more technology that you can handle for the purpose that you want to achieve. Then you really spent a lot of time and effort on money on capacity that you don't need. In terms of values, these are the main aspects of DevOps. We call it CALMs. So the short of all of this is CALMs. Culture, automation, following a lean approach, continuous measurement, continuous sharing, and communication. Again, as I talked about, I don't want to sound like a broken record. Culture is a very big aspect of DevOps, and this is how we're going to basically break down the barrier to work together, not us and them, to work as, in quote, we as a team. So stakeholders, as you can see, you got your development team and you've got your operation team. Those are the two largest stakeholders in the DevOps consideration. But DevOps doesn't limit its use only, to these two groups. As I mentioned, you have to consider from an architectural perspective. You have to consider from an improvement perspective. You have to consider throughout the life cycle of application development. So there is much more than just the development team and the operation team. Something to keep in mind. I'm sure many of you probably have seen or heard some of these titles. These are different tools that are very good at performing different aspects. So these tools, of course, collectively can establish what we call a tool chain to support your DevOps life cycle. So it's not just a tool for testing. You also potentially may need a use case tool, a configuration tool, a deployment tool, and so on and so forth. So as you establish the linkage, you end up with what we call a tool chain. DevOps is there to work what we call the three ways. So very simple kind of comparison. It's like when you're driving on a 5 or 6 lane highway and traffic is nice and smooth, it's a beautiful sunny day, and all of a sudden you get to a slowdown where the 5 or 6 lanes are being merged, or more appropriately being squeezed into 1 or 2 lanes. So what happens here that our workflow or traffic flow ran into constraints. And this is what we need to prevent in the first way. The first way is we need to understand and we need to eliminate any sort of constraints so that we increase the workflow left to right. And the second way, we're doing the same, plus we're getting what we call iterative feedback loops to show us which areas we need to improve. So it's like you get to that point where there is a traffic jam, and very quickly we realize, as an example, that there is a car broken down. So we need to get a tow truck to get it out of the way. So we got the feedback that there is a car broken down, and now based on that feedback, you make a decision. So now we're going back from right to left. The third way is when you are experimenting and introducing incidents and problems into your environment so that you achieve what we call anti-fragility. So not only achieve resilience and fortify your environment, but also to make your system kind of smart enough to know how to deal with different situations. And of course, there is a lot of discussion on this. In the second way and the third way, we are also dependent on what we call improvement kata, which we know as the plan, do, check, act associated with Deming cycle. But in a nutshell, this is the heart of the DevOps type of consideration. So why DevOps? Well, because the big boys want to compete with the small boys, and the small boys want to compete with the big boys. So it's the unicorn versus the horses. DevOps is going to enable you the speed, the agility. DevOps is going to enable you the automation. DevOps is going to enable you saving time and effort and money, the continuous value proposition, and the continuous value delivery. Also, in this day and age, when we're talking about digital services, DevOps is going to enable you to achieve those. And this is now a big buzzword in the government and in the enterprise, even as big as a pizza store. I'm sure many of you have ordered pizza online, or ordered, Uber online, or ordered merchandise online. So now we're getting to the point where, we're actually using services online. So the world of digitization and how DevOps is going to enable you. Also, how DevOps is going to reduce the business pain. And we talked about the speed. So speed to market, speed of releases, responsiveness, just to mention a few. Of course, the accuracy and integrity of your code is optimum in terms of the importance here, something to keep in mind. So we're talking pretty much the same language. I mean, certain slides I'm going to leave for your reading for the sake of time and to make sure that I don't sound like a broken record as well. When we're talking about business outcome, this is basically delivering what the business, let's call it for now, core competency is. So in order to achieve that, streamlining is very important. Minimizing cost is very important. The ability to actually compete with the smaller guy, otherwise you wouldn't be able to survive. The big heavy machine is difficult to maneuver versus a smaller business that is very dynamic, doesn't need a whole lot to make decision, releases, frequent release, doesn't have so many processes and control in place, even though they have governance, but they're not so much kind of locked in the process world. Which brings us to the point when you introduce processes and you need to do that, you want to make sure that you don't lock yourself in them. So you don't want the process to become your bottleneck. There's some statistics here. I'm not going to go through the numbers, but just quickly to show you so many hundreds of times more frequent, more faster, lesser incidents, and so on. I want you to take these numbers with a grain of salt because this is not applicable to the entire industry. This is applicable to certain types of organizations. So something to keep in mind. The same discussion about Internet of Things and how rapidly the increase is in that environment, basically the outcome achieved by it, making sure that, again, you keep in mind that people that or organization that you may be competing with are much, much smaller, even, they could be startup. So the data that you are generating is not just data generated by your people, it's also data generated by, in quote, the devices that you're using for the benefit of your customers. So all of these things you need to keep in mind. This is what I called a little bit earlier, your heart rhythm. So if you take a look at the slide, we have business, we have development, we have operation. So just you being in the IT world, think about the business. The business always wants things to happen yesterday. So quick. Development, the traditional way, if we're following a waterfall, is slow. It takes a lot of time. We have to develop the whole thing and test the whole thing and pilot the whole thing and so on. So we went from quick to slow. And then we went from slow to operation, where operation says, wait a minute, I need to control. I have processes. So you don't have that kind of steady heartbeat. You have arrhythmia, which is not good for your heart. It's not good for your business. So DevOps changes the flow or the rhythm to make it much more continuous, much more rhythmic from beginning to end. The same speed, the same velocity, and velocity here means the amount of work that your team is going to do over a period of time. So whether it's the business or development or operation, we follow kind of a consistent approach that does not cause pain to the business. So you don't have to go to the hospital because of that. So this is very important from the DevOps world. Who's doing DevOps? Pretty much everybody. the one type of organization that is lagging behind it still in that body of knowledge is government, and they're picking up speed slowly but surely on that. We talked about the agility, and when you introduce agility into the business, you're going to change the statistics that we're talking about. So your uptime is going to be, as an example, better and faster. Your incidents and problems gonna have lower statistics and lower numbers, which is good for you, and so on. So when you have the agility, what happens? I would like you to Google this after the webinar. There is something called Agile Manifesto, where on one hand we're saying we need to be fast. We need to have a good relationship with our customer. We need to have good delivery, quality delivery, and so on. Versus the right side, where we see, yeah, but we need to have control. We need to have governance. We need to have contracts, and so on. So when we're talking about agility and we're talking about stability, we're not saying that you have to throw away your conventional approach. What we're saying is that you have to consider a hybrid approach of both perspectives. And this is why I was telling you a little bit earlier that you need to use enough process control so that we don't get hung by the process. You still need to do change management. You cannot ignore change management. But to what level of control? And whether this control is going to be too heavy or we have enough control to be able to actually release our end result. So in terms of the concerned stakeholders, the C-level is concerned, managers are concerned, directors are concerned, developers are concerned, practitioners are concerned. If you take a look at this list, pretty much everybody is concerned. Now, of course, some of them will be more concerned than others. Some of them will be more engaged than others. But generally speaking, all of them are concerned. Are there any questions that I can answer for you?
Yeah, sir, we have a couple of questions. The first one is, what is the difference between DevOps, Agile, and ITIL?
ITIL is a service management life cycle. In other words, ITIL is not about application development. It's not about architecture. So in ITIL, we architect as a result of enterprise architecture or as a result of service design within ITIL itself. We architect a service and then we post it in the service portfolio and we go through the service management life cycle to strategize, design, transition, operate, and improve. In Agile, Agile is a way of dealing with the different tasks that we have. The agility behind it is what makes it very useful. So when we talk, as an example, about the product backlog and the sprint backlog and the stand-up meetings, we talk about time boxes. In other words, we're talking about a very kind of iterative, structured approach to deliver an end result. It's eating the elephant a bite at a time. And associated with Agile, you can use a number of different other practices. Scrum is one of them. Shadowing is another, and so on and so forth. Where DevOps falls back on all of these practices. There is one slide that will actually answer this beautifully, where you have DevOps and the DevOps associated, let's call it for now, life cycle areas, and how you need to support it and enable it. DevOps itself does not have processes. It falls back on Agile, on ITIL, on enterprise architecture related processes and practices to get the job done. Another question?
Sure. How would app support fit into DevOps?
So remember the combination when we talk about development and operation. Your app support is part of your ops under application management and application support, which is the tail end of DevOps. So you have the development group that is going to integrate with the application support group. And also a different mindset states that you develop it, you support it. So now the development group is not static anymore at the front end or at the first half. It's also going to cross that boundary and perform the app support in the second half. If not at first level, at minimum, it will be at second and third level as well. Any other questions?
Just one more. What are some tips on getting executive level support for implementing DevOps?
Pain points. You need to share, and you need to show your pain points. Why do we need DevOps? You have to show the benefits of introducing DevOps, the agility, speaking the same language, breaking down barriers, working as one team, eat the elephant at multiple bites instead of trying to chew the whole thing as one big bite to choke on. And when you show the business pain, in other words, the different areas where we're failing in application development and application support, then you will be able to sell to the business. Because if the business wants to make money and reduce total cost of ownership and increase margins and capture market share, all of this good stuff, then they'll buy into it fairly quickly.
We got a couple more questions in and then we will move on. How do you recommend automation help in delivering quality applications?
This is, so let's take a step back for a second. So an automated testing will, as an example, help you quite a bit in saving time and effort in capturing the test results. Code integration will help you, as an example, in making sure that your code is not conflicting with anything else that you are using. So when you have that code in the repository, there is some sort of a checksum that happens to ensure that there is no conflict. So there are specialized tools that you're going to consider from the world of application development, delivery, testing, deploying, and eventually all the way to configuration management. And these tools, or this tool chain, as I mentioned, will definitely help the speed and help the results and the frequency of releases, which will eventually save you time and effort and money.
Okay, and last question, it's a follow-up to the app support question. Does that mean that the developers would be required to be the first level of support rather than the second or third?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I mean, the developers today, what I'm saying is that development group need to be involved in operation and in support, not have that barrier between the two groups. Today, in many organizations, there is this invisible wall between the two groups. We need to work as a team. So in some cases, if I throw you at level 1, it's just for you to experience that, as I mentioned earlier. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be part of your role. So this is part of understanding what the different groups go through. You still, in terms of escalation, perform level 2 and level 3, etc. It doesn't mean that you're going to be, level 1, because you don't want to eliminate the service desk. That's going to cause a whole slew of additional problems, and you don't want that. So we need to move forward because time is catching us. So DevOps practices and buzzwords. Today, I mentioned a number of these terms. Continuous integration. This is about integrating your code. Continuous delivery, so making sure that your software is in a constant state of delivery to the next phase. Continuous deployment, that your software is in a constant state of deployment onto the live environment. Continuous testing, self-explanatory. And then you have the rugged DevOps, DevSecOps for security, Kanban. For those who are familiar, this is basically a board with some sticky notes that you establish in terms of what is your backlog looks like and what is work in progress, and you pull down based on needs and requirements. And then you have the existing industry frameworks So things like Agile and Scrum and ITIL and Lean and many others. So all of these collectively, they help, they share, they support, they enable DevOps practices in some shape or form. So this is kind of a straightforward, if you want to call it, definition. I'm just going to tap into a couple of them. So continuous integration, again, development practice that requires developers to commit code into a shared repository. And that code, of course, when we say integrated, it means that there is no conflict. Continuous delivery, focusing on making sure you're always in a releasable state. Continuous testing, make sure that you're automated in testing. So whatever is basically part of your deployment pipeline, as soon as you move on to the next state, you're automatically being or undertaking the testing to make sure that there are no issues with the code. Continuous deployment, enabling every change that passes the test to be readily available or to be automatically deployed to production. Now, on this point, this is applicable to the big type of organizations or for software houses where you have a large number of releases to be deployed on regular basis. Not everybody is in need of continuous deployment. So it's just something to keep in mind. The deployment pipeline or the life cycle and the continuous feedback based on the plan, do, check, act. So here is a reflection of that deployment pipeline. So as you can see, we're going from, and by the way, this is just within the world of development and operation. So on the left side, there is architecture and there is design, which is not really part of that deployment. So once the code is being developed, this is where you get the commitment, you build, you test, you stage, you deploy, and eventually go into production. And the bottom feedback is what we call continuous feedback. Remember, let's hide all of these burgundy arrows for a second. If you put your hand on the screen and just look at the top blue pipe, that's the first way. And then you take your hand off and you see all the arrows iterating back. Well, now that's the second way, including the feedback that you have at the bottom. And the third way is when you start putting sticks in the wheels to purposely figure out what's the result of that experimentation and how you're going to reach your anti-fragility status. So this is an example of your deployment pipeline. Okay. The same story about the tool chain. I'll leave the specific reading for you, but let me go back here for a second. We don't have enough room at the bottom of this screen, but consider at the bottom of this screen, let's say another 5 boxes, and one box that says use case, another one that says Visio, another one that says testing, another one that says SMS, and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, you've got a whole bunch of different tools, or in other terms, you could have Puppet and or Jenkins and ServiceNow and Tivoli and whatever else, which will constitute what we talk about here as your tool chain that will enable you to automate end-to-end. Also is going to enable you to monitor, is going to enable you to support. So it depends as to what kind of tools you plug in here. So you have tools associated with the code, you have tools associated with support, you have tools associated with delivery, with test, and we can go on and on about this. So the magic slide, actually there are those two kind of returning arrows. They should have been in white. I don't know if you guys can see them vaguely. They look dark on the left and right of DevOps. Nevertheless, what you see on the screen is the dependency of DevOps on other best practices. So on the left side, the vertical blue bar that shows enterprise architecture and DevOps reference architecture. This is something you need to figure out. This is something you need to establish. It's not something that you kind of gonna swing. So you need to figure out what my DevOps architecture gonna look like. What is that reference model gonna look like? Besides the life cycle that I have in DevOps, develop and build and have a package repository, testing, staging, production. Besides all of this, what processes, what best practices do I need to put in place? So you notice that in the light bluish, you have all what we call DevOps practices, but technically speaking, these are processes that existed even before DevOps. Like DevOps did not reinvent the wheel here, but in order for it to be successful, you're gonna need Agile Scrum, you're gonna need all the continuous practices, you're gonna need the processes, the IT service management support processes in yellow, you're gonna need improvement or feedback, including Lean IT, and you're definitely gonna need a great deal of cultural change to invoke that collaboration as you mature your DevOps practice within your business. Again, this is an example. Actually, this is not just an example about what best practices you're going to need to support DevOps. It also talks about different certifications. So in Agile Scrum, there is a number of different certifications, Foundation and Master. In Lean IT, there is Foundation. Unless if you go now towards Six Sigma, then there is a whole bunch of other certifications. In IT service management, or in other words, in ITIL, there is Foundation, there is 5 life cycle and 4 capabilities, and 1, I call it the bridge between the two, which is managing across the life cycle. You've got TOGAF for enterprise architecture, and of course, the center of all of this were DevOps. Now you notice there are a number of different certifications there. And this is what I was talking about earlier, that these certifications, they're more vertical until they kind of link them together. So you've got the foundation that is across the board for anybody, a prerequisite for any of the certifications. And then you have continuous delivery architect or CDA. You have DevOps test engineer or DTE. You have DevOps leader or DOL. You have certified agile service manager or CASM, and there is professional and master level certifications as well in the DevOps world, but by a different examination institute. And of course, very important, communicate some more. We talked about this, and you're not going to be able to change the culture if you don't have the proper communication. And of course, you need to have certain tools in place to achieve that properly, and a little bit more on the certification now in a little bit more details, identifying what they are and by which examination institute. The last two at the bottom, DevOps Professional and DevOps Master, are actually issued through Exen. Everything above that, from Foundation to Certified Agile Process Owner, is issued through PeopleCert certification. And needless to say that we offer all of these certifications. Some of them are actually in the last stages of release by the Examination Institute, but most of them are readily available for the course participants. Any questions?
A question that we have, our company just divided into run and change teams, support versus new development. Does DevOps suggest putting them back together based on previous comments?
Well, DevOps suggests that there is an open communication between them. It doesn't have to be the same functional group. And please don't misunderstand the message. We're not saying here that you should not have a development group and an operation group. You need to have them. They have different roles and different responsibilities, but at the same time, you need to make sure that the culture, that the communication, that the tools, that the practice, like, don't come in and throw something in my lap and go away. You may be even providing some of the support. So that's what DevOps is about. DevOps does not tell you put everybody in one big group. That's not going to work. Other questions?
What are some of the reporting tools available to evaluate how well an organization is implementing DevOps?
If you check puppet.com, they have an annual report that talks about these different tools that will provide you a much more accurate view. So puppet.com annual report. And also really it depends on what is the tool that you have implemented to begin with. So like I'm talking about, if in quote, the mother tool, right?
Should my entire team be DevOps trained, or is it okay just to have a couple?
The suggestion is that everybody needs to speak that language. So by default, the whole team needs to be trained. Now, some of them may need to be trained at a foundation level. Some of them may need to be trained at, let's say, as a test engineer level or as a different level. That becomes a little bit more specific to the role of the individual. But for everybody to speak the same language, the recommendation is that they all need to be certified, at least at the foundation level.
And it looks like one last question. What are some suggestions for incentivizing my team to achieve goals?
A common complaint today is that different teams are not, how should I say this? Different teams are kind of stopping at a point where the handoff is incomplete. So collaboration, less stress, making sure that we have a better understanding end-to-end, understanding the dependency between the different functional groups, and sharing the knowledge and sharing, as I call it, not necessarily sharing the knowledge only, but also sharing the capability, like cross-pollination between those teams, where, as I said, you may use one team or some of this team in support and some of the support in development. They learn from each other and so on. It's a new way. It's an innovative way, certainly much more satisfying in terms of seeing the results of your activity. You don't have to wait forever to figure out if your release is working or not working, just to mention a few.
Nasser, I think that's about it. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. Some of the related ProTech training courses are up on your screen right now. I will be sharing a copy of today's slide deck with links to these courses, as well as a link to today's recorded session, and finally an evaluation to show how we might improve on future courses or some other webinars like this that you might like to see. If there aren't any other questions, then we are going to go ahead and wrap up for today. ProTech Training thanks you, and stay tuned for future webinars on protechtraining.com. Thank you so much, everyone.